Welcome to today's Mind Your Career webinar program. My name is Adam Sylvain, and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled 10 Coaching Skills Every Leader Should Master. Today, we'll hear from certified career coach and national career expert, Hallie Crawford. Her company, HallieCrawford.com, and team of coaches have helped thousands of people identify and transition into their ideal career. Hallie is a regularly featured career expert in the media, including US News, Forbes.com, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, and Fox Business News. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to cede the floor to Hallie.
Thank you, Adam. Really appreciate that introduction, and thank you everyone for being here today. We greatly appreciate your time on what is most likely your lunch hour. So I am Hallie Crawford. As Adam said, I'm a certified career coach, speaker, and author, and I'm actually based in Atlanta, Georgia. And yes, it is getting a little bit cold here, although I know for those of you who are in Chicago or from Chicago, in Atlanta, it's nothing like it is up there. I actually lived in Chicago for over 10 years. So we are going to be talking today about 10 coaching skills that we feel every leader should master in some way, shape, or form. And just as a quick introduction here, and just so you all know too, I have two screens. So if I'm looking to the side for just a second, it's to help me make sure I'm advancing the slides in the right way. So as Adam said, I'm Hallie Crawford. I'm a certified career coach, speaker, and author. We are based in Atlanta, Georgia. I have an undergraduate degree from Vanderbilt University and a master's degree from the University of Illinois, actually. And I have been coaching and training for over 19 years now. And I know some of you are probably thinking, how is that possible? Because she sounds like she's 12. I'm actually 46. And we absolutely love what we do, enabling our clients to identify their career direction and be successful in their career path, including helping them become better leaders and managers. And one of the things that I wanted to tell you all first is that I do understand how it can feel to not be so great of a leader or feel like you need to improve, because I was like that when I first started my coaching practice. I had no idea what I needed to do in order to manage the staff that I had and the vendors that worked for me as well. So I get how kind of daunting this can kind of feel for you. And these tips that we're going to be giving you today, and I'll advance it to the next slide here so you can start to see what our agenda is. These 10 tips are things that we actually share and coach our clients on. We train our clients to a certain extent to be more coach-like in their career path, because we have found that that's incredibly successful and useful to them, especially when they're leaders and managers, but honestly, even beyond that, just as an employee, when they're needing to be better at managing up. So please know the advice we're giving today goes across the board. So here's our agenda on this first slide here. We're going to do a quick introduction to frame out how we define what coaching means, because I'm sure you all have heard about it before, but you probably have a lot of different assumptions or heard definitions or different definitions of what it actually is. So we'll start with that. We are going to go through 10 critical coaching skills that we find that if you can start to master these over time, kind of one by one, you will be an enormously more effective leader, if you will. And then I am going to give you some suggested homework. We do want you to walk away at the end of this with specific action items that you will take to start incorporating these coaching skills into your professional lives. We will have time at the end for Q&A, as Adam said. And by the way, just at the bottom here, if any of you would like to have a copy of our presentation from today, please don't hesitate to email us at admin@HallieCrawford.com. We would be more than happy to share that with you. And then you don't have to feel like you're frantically taking notes the whole time. So one of the first things we wanted to do, Adam, if you could bring up this first poll, is we wanted to kind of get the lay of the land here with who's attending today and why you're interested in developing coaching skills. Is it because you're a new leader and you feel like, ooh, I need to brush up on certain areas or in certain areas? Is it that you're dealing with difficult employees or teammates? It could be that you want to take on more responsibility and become a leader, move up, or it could be another reason. So if you could fill out our poll for us, that would be great. And then Adam, if you don't mind, if you would read out the results to me. I can never figure out where they are in the PowerPoint or in the GoToWebinar. So thanks for that.
Absolutely, yeah. So we have just about 80% responded. So we'll just give a couple more seconds here for folks to make their selection, and I'll share out those responses. I did also have at least one attendee who said that they were having issues hearing. Remember that you can dial in from your phone if you're experiencing any of those issues. So just noting that for anybody. So here we
Okay,
go.
good.
Here are our responses. So we have a pretty good even spread here. We have 32% that responded said that they are interested in developing coaching skills because of difficult employees. Another 32% that want to take on more responsibility and become a leader. 32% who indicated other, and then not far behind, 25% who said that they are a new leader and are interested in developing these skills.
Okay, great. I like it when we have kind of an even split there. That's perfect. Thank you, Adam, for sharing those. We appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for participating, too. So just as a quick reminder, part of why we do this poll is, number one, to remind you that you're not alone. A lot of people feel like they need to develop certain skills to be a better leader. And then also to remind you, too, that the strengths and the skills that we're going to be talking about today will work for you across the board. But what I want you all to pay attention to and think about, and I'll talk a little bit louder too in case the volume is partly due to my volume, so I'll talk a little bit louder as well. But the strengths and skills that we're talking about today, everyone, of course, there may be one or two that are more relevant to your situation, or things that, there may be some that you're already kind of good at, but you need to focus on some other ones. So please look at it through that lens of what your situation is and what's going to be most important for you to be more effective. So let's take a look at this next slide, and I'm not going to read this slide to you. Just a quick overview of an introduction, if you will, to coaching. Coaching really started to become more mainstream, if you will, in the 90s when we went through a recession. And it was less about it's only for executives and people in the C-suite or the boardroom, more for, professionals of all levels. And as most of you probably know of or have heard of Stephen Covey and Tony Robbins, those are two kind of gurus, if you will, who helped make the idea of coaching for your professional life, but also your personal life, not just, for your sports team, et cetera, a little bit more mainstream and something that people were more interested in pursuing and finding out more about and getting, a coach to help them with their professional lives. So let me pull up this definition here on this next slide. The way that we're defining for our purposes today, and the way I was trained as a coach from the Coaches Training Institute, which is out of California, is that whether you think of it as executive or business coaching or performance coaching, it's basically described as helping someone learn in order to improve their performance in some specific area. It typically can be a one-on-one relationship and interaction. And one of the critical things for people to understand about true coaching, though, is that true coaching is not about telling people what to do as a consultant would. It's not about issuing instructions all the time, but it's much more about helping someone come to their own answers, showing them how to do something, giving them constructive feedback and advice in some cases, or explaining something and encouraging them. So it's much less about going in and saying, this is what we need to do and how we need to do it, end of story. And it's more about helping someone along the path that they need to go on. So take a look at this next slide for a moment here, and this will help kind of explain it even more. What it is and what it is not, again, this is in terms of true coaching, if you will. It's a method to provide guidance to professionals. It's designed to empower people to help them find their own answers as much as possible. Okay, this is within reason. Sometimes they're not going to have the answer, and sometimes they may not have the right answer. So you will need to step in some cases. But the idea with coaching would be to try to empower people to find their own answers, because then they'll be more kind of bought into what that answer is and feel more confident and empowered overall as a professional. Okay, and finally, coaching coaching is not therapy, but obviously, as you can imagine, feelings may come up, and I'm sure you've experienced this in the workplace, and they may need to be addressed. And if that's the case and it's time to bring HR in for a specific situation, okay, that's totally fine, but you need to be prepared that feelings may come up. And finally, coaching is not consulting, if you will. And this is kind of what I was describing already just a minute ago, is that ideally, you're not just going in and being a consultant and telling someone what to do. Ideally, you're asking them the right questions, showing them how to find the answers on their own. But in some cases, as you see at the bottom of this slide, consulting and giving advice may be required at sometimes, and that's okay. But one of the things that when I attended coaching school that, their biggest thing at the very beginning was literally they wanted us to kind of, tie our hands behind our back and not have us be giving people advice all the time. Because as humans, that's our nature. We want to help and we want to be helpful to someone and say, okay, this is what I think you should do, and give them that advice. But it's really empowering for other people if you can work more towards asking them the right questions and helping them find their own answers as often as possible, realizing that this is not always going to be the case and the possibility, okay? So that gives us kind of our foundational definition, if you will, for coaching. And I'm just going to move over here a little bit because I know the sun's coming in. I love my office with huge windows, but sometimes the glare gets in the way. So here are the 10 critical coaching skills that we are going to discuss today. By the way, these are listed on a handout that is downloadable from your control panel there. And we're going to just touch on these very briefly, as you can imagine, because there's so many of them. But I want you to identify, as we said before, which are the ones, the top 3, if you will, that would be the ones you need to work on the most, and get started with those first, okay? So our first one is what coaches would call creating a safe and quote-unquote courageous space. And this sounds, this is very coach-like language, if you will, and I want to explain why this is important, okay? The reason why we discuss this with our clients and would suggest it to you is ideally, in an ideal world, we want people to move towards open and direct communication. As a leader, we would ideally like people to be able to come to you and express a concern they might have, or a complaint, or ask a question, versus, for example, you being a very intimidating leader. So I was working with some EMBAs at the University of Idaho last year, and most of the people in the room there are CEOs, run their own company. And one man said, I found out or discovered just about a year ago that the majority of my small company, they're intimidated by me and they're kind of afraid of me. And I didn't intend for that to happen, but that's how things played out. And so we worked with him on how to make it safe for people to approach him with different concerns, issues, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that you would want to do as a leader, not only to create this kind of safe space, if you will, and encourage people to be open with you and direct and all of that and ask questions, but also to structure your work relationships effectively. That is what is on this slide. So you would like to, the ideal would be to every conversation that you have and every work relationship that you have, you want to structure it so that it's effective for the two of you. You want to structure the relationships, the conversations, and the meetings. And having agreements like the ones on this slide here in advance of each of those types of situations will help you create this kind of safe and more positive, productive space, if you will, between the two of you to have your relationship be more productive and effective. So first of all, one of the things you need to consider, especially if your conversation with someone is going to be kind of touchy, does it need to be confidential? Do you need to let them know in some cases when you're talking with someone, or maybe in a full meeting, does the information shared in that meeting or between the two of you, does it need to be confidential, and do you need to address that up front and let them know that it can be? The second thing to do to be a more effective and empowered leader, to create this more positive environment, work environment, if you will, is to explain your style and what your strengths are and your desires are as a leader. So don't just talk about the tasks at hand and the projects you need to complete all the time, but start to communicate to your employees and your coworkers, et cetera, what your style is and what your strengths are so that they understand when they need to leverage you and why you come across in the way that you do. And as part of this, kind of as a sub bullet here, be willing as a leader to be vulnerable or open when it's appropriate. Now, some people will say, gosh, well, if I do that, then I'm kind of looking too vulnerable and like I don't know what I'm doing. This is, again, you need to do this when it's appropriate. Sometimes it's not appropriate to do so. But for example, the man that we were just talking about, that I was just talking about a moment ago, he would share stories of when he felt less confident in a sales meeting or with a new client, for example. And that helped people connect with him more and feel more comfortable talking with him about where their struggles were. So that's an example of something that you could do to show that you're vulnerable or be vulnerable, but not in a way that's going to undermine your credibility. The third thing that you want to do with meetings, conversations, et cetera, and relationships is establish the goals for the conversation. What do we need to accomplish here in this conversation that we're having, or in this professional relationship that we have? What are our goals? How do we need to work together more effectively? And then finally, in a one-on-one conversation, when you start out with especially if you're going to talk about something that is possibly touchy for someone to hear, is there anything urgent that they need to talk about first in the conversation that they may need to get off their chest or whatever it is? So be sure as a leader, again, within reason, keeping in mind it's a professional relationship, but check in with people regarding how they're feeling about their job and if they're feeling motivated and empowered and everything else, as well as tasks when it's appropriate. So don't just dive into the project or the task every time. Check in every once in a while with how people are feeling and if they're feeling rewarded and fulfilled by their position and what's going on within the organization, okay? The next thing you want to do in order to create this kind of safe space and design the relationship effectively, and then we'll do our second poll here in just a moment, is in terms of managing the relationship more effectively, you want to also, when you're meeting with people, whether it's in a group or one-on-one, you want to kind of pay attention to gut check the energy, so to speak. Pay attention to the energy in the room, the energy between the two of you. How are they seeming to come across in your mind, and how might they be feeling based on, the nonverbals that they're giving you? And pay attention to that and ask them about it if needed. Don't just step over it because it feels uncomfortable and then go to the task at hand. Check in with them and ask them how they're doing as appropriate and if you sense something may be going on. Next, if there is something touchy that you need to discuss with someone or give them difficult feedback that may be hard to hear, let them know in advance, hey, I kind of need to talk with you about something that may be difficult for you to hear and kind of absorb. Is it okay if we talk about it right now? I need to tell you this because I care about your professional development and I need to give you this feedback, okay? So give people a heads up in advance if you need to have a tough or difficult conversation, okay? Be sure on a regular basis, like we said before, to ask a lot of questions. Check in with them regularly. Don't just tell people what to do all the time. Let them know in advance at the beginning of the relationship, or even if you decide I need to redesign a relationship, for example, with a difficult employee, tell them that you need to give them feedback and you need to give it to them on a regular basis, and you want to be able to do that. Ask for their permission to do so, so to speak, to make sure that they're good with it. And even more so, find out what the best way is for them to receive feedback. Do they want it in person, or is it better for them to get it via email because they can process it a little bit first? And then finally, every time you meet with someone, you want to make sure, obviously, that you review the action items and reflect back things that they have said to you so that they feel heard. This reflecting back to people is critically important in terms of effective listening, which we're going to talk about next. In order for someone to feel heard and understood, it doesn't mean that you have to go with their advice, and it doesn't mean that you agree with them necessarily, but that reflecting back and repeating back a few of the things that they've said during the conversation will help them feel more comfortable coming to you again that next time. So let's do our second poll here, Adam, if we could. And our second one is, what makes you more willing or most willing to be vulnerable or open with someone. And as we said before, as you're filling this out, you've got 3 options here. This isn't an ideal world. We get it, that this is our professional lives and there's politics that occur in any job, et cetera, but we're moving the needle towards it being ideal where people can be open and honest about what's going on. So if you could fill this out, that would be great. And then Adam, if you can read the results, that'd be fantastic too.
Absolutely. So I'll give just a couple more seconds for folks to register their response, and then I'll share those out with the group.
Awesome.
All right, so it looks like we have more of a majority here. So 74% that said what makes them most willing to be vulnerable or open with someone is trust. 18% said that that person being open with them is what makes them most willing. And then 9% indicated empathy as their choice.
Okay, wonderful. Good. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome, everybody. So the ways that we're talking in these first few slides about structuring and designing relationships like this is how you can begin to build trust with other people, because you're showing them that there's a structure in place. You've asked them for permission to give feedback and found out how to give them feedback. What's the most effective way to do that? So that's perfect. That trust one is a big one. And all of the things actually today that we're talking about are going to help you build that trust. Let's move to the 3 levels of listening, and we're going to describe what these mean. And at the end of this little section here, I'm going to give you a tool that can help you evaluate your listening skills so far. So 3 levels of listening in terms of coaching is level 1 is our internal listening. It's listening to our own inner voice, like I'm hungry, this meeting is boring, why are they rambling on, whatever it is, okay? It could include judgment about another person or what's going on, or just kind of our own inner dialogue. And we have to have it, it's part of being human. But our ideal is instead to move towards the levels 2 and 3 of listening. Level 2 here is on this slide, and that is what we call focus listening. Basically, it's focused on the other person, listening to everything that they're saying as much as you can, but also their nonverbals and any nuances that are going on that they're giving you by their facial expression or talking with their hands, et cetera, et cetera. Leaders need to ideally be at this level versus level 1, and then we want you to add level 3 as well. So the deal is, everyone, if you drop into level 1 listening, which is normal, that's just, again, we have to have it and part of being human, you want to just be mindful of it and aware, okay, level 1 listening, I need to get back over there with the other person. So focus listening is listening to exactly what they're saying, but also what they may not be saying to you based on their nonverbals. And then level 3 is what we call global listening. And this is basically the energy between the two of you, shifts in energy, how that person, what their mood might be, or the tone of the conversation. And you absolutely need to pay attention to what's going on when it's a one-on-one conversation especially, but including in meetings. Like, are people just not buying into what you're saying? And instead of just continuing on with the meeting, stop and say, okay, what's going on here, everybody? Do we need to talk about something? Is there confusion? Like, raise hands, tell me what's up, okay? Because if you just kind of blow right past it, people aren't going to feel heard, and you may be on a completely different page with the rest of your team as a result. How do we get into this level 3 listening? The ways to do this is to slow down your talking a little bit and be more deliberate when you're talking with someone. Be quieter, be okay with, that pause or silence sometimes so you can allow people to process what you've said. Still your body, calm yourself down a little bit and slow down like we said, but also don't step over things that people are giving you clues to or cues in what they're saying during the course of the meeting, or maybe what they're not saying. Call those out and pull them out of people as needed, okay? And it's okay, by the way, from a coaching perspective, and you can set this up in your agreement with them at the beginning of the relationship or at the beginning of the meeting, but it's okay to interrupt people sometimes and kind of guide them to what you need during the course of the meeting. And then finally, another way to get into this level 3 listening is to ask a question of the group or the person rather than giving advice. That's another way to kind of gut check what's going on in the course of, the meeting or with the group one-on-one. And finally, we're going to do our third poll here for just a second before we move on to the next slide. And what we want to ask you on this one, Adam, if you can pull poll number 3 up, and I'll read this to you all as well, too, so you have it, is basic yes or no. How many people feel like, based on what we've just talked about, these 3 levels of listening specifically, how many of you feel like you have truly effective listening skills? And by the way, it's okay if you feel like, might not be as good as I thought. We can all obviously improve. So we'll give you a moment to do that.
All right, we have almost everyone responded. Give just a couple more seconds here, and then I'll share out our responses to this third poll.
Okay, good. And I keep having to move over because the sun is shifting. It's funny. I was telling Adam earlier I need to get shades on my windows, but I love having the sun.
All right, so we have a majority, 74%, that feel that they do have effective listening skills, and 26% that said no. So like you said, you asked everyone to make a decision here, so that's our split.
Awesome. Great. Okay, good. So one of the things that I would encourage all of you to do, even including the people who feel like they have good listening skills, is try out this active and empathic listening skill and worksheet that we have. It's very quick and easy, quick quiz, and maybe share it with some of those employees who may not be doing as well as they could and are coming across as a little bit difficult. It could be a tool that you ask other people to complete as well. But feel free to email us at admin@halliecrawford.com. It's a very quick checklist that can really give you a clear sense of whether your listening skills are up to par, but also give you a few areas where you may need to improve. So we love this tool. We use it with our clients all the time. Highly recommend you guys checking that out. It's just a quick one-pager. All right, so let's take a look at tip number 3, and this is guiding people, not advising. And we talked about this already a little bit. Let me pull up a couple things on this slide here that I want you to see, and then I'll show you some examples in just a moment here. So what we call the right type of questions, if you will, in coaching are what we call powerful questions. And they're basically very curious questions that are open-ended. They don't have judgment in them, and they allow the person to come up with their own answers. And the other thing that you'll notice about powerful questions too is that it assumes a positive outcome, and that's part of what is so powerful and wonderful about them. The bottom line is, everyone, that powerful questions are open-ended. They are not yes or no questions. So they are things like the examples on this slide. There's 3 here. How can we work together more effectively? Note that it assumes a positive outcome, that you can. It's possible to do so. What do you want to achieve with this particular project? Or what's another choice that you can make? So to be a true coach, one of the things that you want to lead with as a leader is lead with powerful questions versus, again, just telling them what to do. Try this out in the next week. See where it gets you. And if you start asking people questions more frequently, or at least at the beginning of your conversations, what fantastic answers they come up with. You might discover, and a lot of times we find this with our clients actually, is that they will discover that the people they're talking to actually have really great ideas about what they should be doing. No one asked them before, or they weren't encouraged to find their own way. And so using powerful questions like this can also encourage the trust, as we talked about, that open, direct communication, and also encourage more creative, kind of open-minded thinking as well. That's part of what's so wonderful about it, because as a leader, that's part of what you want to do, is lean on your team to generate and gather advice and ideas and thoughts from them too. Tip number 4, or coaching skill number 4, I should say, is a very important one, and it's self-management. The idea is we don't want to be like the guy on the slide here in Office Space, right? I'm aging myself, I realize. So tip number 4 is to practice and make sure that you're engaging in, if you will, solid, good self-management. One of the things that can be very difficult as a leader and just as an employee in general is to manage our emotions and our frustration with a project or something going on, all the way to if there's conflict and we want to avoid it. So self-management and really understanding and being better with our emotional intelligence, which is the book that we recommend if you feel like you could do a little bit better with this. There's an image of it on the slide here, is enabling yourself as a leader to stay present with the person that you're talking to, not thinking about, what's going on for you, but also managing those negative emotions effectively, okay? It's really important to be more comfortable, obviously, with managing and handling conflict, but also being patient as a leader. Getting back into your body and taking a deep breath can help you manage some of those more difficult emotions effectively. It may be if you're frustrated with someone, you need to not talk to them right away and sleep on it overnight and talk with a friend or mentor overnight to figure out how to approach that person or that situation. It may be if you are more of a journaler and a writer that you need to write about what's going on to get that clarity about, what crops up on the page for you to get a little bit more clarity about how you need to handle something. So self-management is critically important so that you don't just bulldoze someone in a meeting or you get frustrated and lose your cool with someone. You want to make sure that you're constantly paying attention to this element, this critical coaching skill. As coaches, we are taught to not be judgmental with clients and not be attached to the outcome and not have an agenda. As a leader, obviously, to a certain extent, you will have an agenda. You need to get this project done, et cetera, et cetera. But in order to be less judgmental about the person, you need to practice that self-management. All right, so skill number 5 is curiosity, like we talked about before. So park your judgment or opinion at the door in some cases where you think that's going to be important to do so because you need to boost someone's confidence or empower them more to find their own answers. Again, staying present with the other person will help you be more curious. A lot of times our minds are going a mile a minute and we're thinking about the next thing that we want to be saying to the person. And instead of that, really focusing on being present with them first is going to help you have a more engaged, productive conversation. Offer your opinion when it's appropriate, as we said before. But as I said earlier, as humans, we tend to just want to fix something and give our opinion too quickly. So be mindful of when you're going that direction and try a powerful question instead. And make an effort, finally, the part of why curiosity helps build trust so much and also empowers the other person is it helps you demonstrate that you're trying to understand their perspective as well. So part of being curious is asking them how they view something, how they view this task or project or the mission of the organization, whatever it is, and make an effort, a true effort to understand their perspective. As I said earlier, it doesn't mean you have to agree, and it doesn't mean that you have to go with what their opinion or their, recommended action item is. But at least if you've tried to understand their perspective, you have made them feel heard, which again builds that trust and gets them kind of on your side and on board with what's going on. Okay. Skill number 6 is checking in more regularly with your intuition. And this is one of the things that as a leader, it's critically important because so often we just, again, get right to the task at hand and the project we need to work on and what do we need to be doing next. So instead of just being so kind of in your head all the time and mentally, okay, what do I need to do next? And logically, use this other side of your brain and kind of your heart, your gut instinct, and regularly check in with your intuition about what may be going on with a project that is going off the rails or going on with another employee. Listen to what people are not saying to you just as much as what they are saying to you. Share your intuition with people sometimes when you just feel like you have to because you've got a gut instinct about something, and do so in a non-judgmental way and without attachment to how they're going to perceive it. And just by the way, when you're thinking about and sharing your intuition, it could be a feeling that you have about something like this just feels off. What do we need to do about it? It could be words to describe it, or you could use an analogy to describe what's going on with your intuition and kind of your gut instinct there. So just know too that intuition can come out, if you will, in a lot of different ways. So that is skill number 6. leveraging intuition more frequently. Number 7 is to constantly, as part of being a leader, make sure that with your employees and coworkers as appropriate, that you're constantly forwarding the action and they're learning as a coworker or an employee. And this is kind of like being a mentor to them. So on the bottom of this slide here, part of what you want to do as a leader as well is to suggest possible action items for them. So this is where you can give that advice. If they're not sure, what they need to do about something, don't let the meeting just kind of wander all over and not close it out with, what do we need to do differently with this? Suggest some possible action items that can be taken in order to rectify a certain situation or make changes. Make sure that you always close that out and have those action items in place so that you're doing something differently each time as appropriate. Provide that accountability to them. So don't just, again, let it kind of wander off and then leave the meeting with no accountability. Consider how you need to hold each of your employees accountable and find out from them what's the best way for them to do that. How often do they prefer to meet with you? Again, it doesn't mean that you have to be amenable to that. You need to think about your style, obviously, as well, but talk with them about accountability and how they would prefer to be empowered, what tools they need to be successful, and also how can you provide the right accountability to them in what ways. And then finally, keeping in mind too that sometimes action items for people to that they need to take on or things that they need to learn could be soft skills, if you will, or something that they just need to think about, like a new perspective that they may need to ponder or consider taking on a specific project or task. So just keeping in mind that action items are not always about going to do something or write something down or whatever it is, something tangible like that. It could also be something that they need to kind of noodle on, if you will. That's the technical term that we use with our clients. It could be something that they just need to kind of think about that could shift the way they do something, but enormously impact how they perform their job as a result. So skill number 7 is to be mindful at all times of what's the action or the learning here that needs to come out of this conversation or project. Just really quickly, I wanted to mention to you all before we get to skill number 8, if anyone feels like I need a little bit more in-depth help with some of these skills that we're discussing based on your specific situation, we'd be happy to offer a complimentary career strategy session. It's one-on-one with me to get advice on any career goal that you feel like you need help with or any of the skills that we're talking about today. Please don't hesitate to take advantage of that, because I realize that as we're talking through these coaching skills, we're giving kind of the big picture here, and also your situation may be unique and you need specific advice for your particular situation. Happy to do that. Skill number 8 is to practice and develop empathy a little bit more. So as we talked about this with the poll a little bit earlier, empathy is a critical piece to developing trust. It's the thing that trust kind of stands on, if you will, underneath. Empathy, as it's defined, is from Psychology Today, just using this as an example. It's the experience of understanding someone else's, walking in someone else's shoes, how they might feel, what their thought process might be, their feelings, their point of view, et cetera, instead of just assuming that they're coming from the same place that you are. And this can make a huge difference in whether or not someone trusts you and whether or not they feel you understand their perspective. So empathy is something to develop enormously by the 3 levels of listening, as we talked about. Also to asking, or as part of developing empathy, asking those powerful questions. That's a critical piece as well, because that will help you start to imagine, okay, how they're coming across and how they might be feeling about a specific project, task, et cetera, okay? I'm going to shift over here a little bit more. So developing empathy is a huge critical coaching skill, because then they feel like you can understand where they are coming from, and they will trust you more to come to you with a question or an issue that they might have. One of the things that I wanted to share as part of developing the sense of empathy with your employees and coworkers is to understand this model, which is the 4 needs of followers. And we use the term followers here, but basically this is for any professional, including coworkers. So these are the needs that everyone has as an employee of any organization. And they are these 4 basic ones here. We all want to have a sense of trust in our organization in some way, shape, or form, that our leaders and coworkers, et cetera, are going to be honest with us, and they will provide us with a sense of respect and vice versa. We all want to have a sense of stability in our jobs, have that sense of job security, at least to a certain extent, that we have a sense of peace in, what we do in our workday, and there's not going to be a lot of drama all the time. The third one is a sense of compassion from the leadership in our organization and our coworkers, et cetera. And then finally, we want to have a sense of hope, like we know where our organization and our company is going, and we believe in it, and we know what the direction is, and we're getting guidance from the leaders within our organization. So in order to become a better leader, we need to understand what these 4 needs of followers are, so to speak, because if there's an issue with a difficult employee, for example, it could be that they're lacking in one of these areas. So this can help give you a sense of where you need to strengthen your leadership skills. What do I need to be providing more to my team that I may not as much? Is it the stability or the compassion, for example? And it also can give you a sense of what may be going on with some of your coworkers that is causing them to have trouble within their job or be unsatisfied, and also why they may be being difficult. And this is something that you can bring to your team if you feel it's appropriate, and talk about each of these 4 pieces to find out where things need to be improved. So these are the 4 needs of followers. Just by the way, these come from Development Dimensions International, which is a management consulting firm, very highly regarded. And from all of their statistical work and surveying, this is what they have discovered the 4 main needs would be of followers. Tip number 9 is to do a better job of recognizing other people's strengths. So we talked earlier about recognizing what your own strengths are as a leader and being able to communicate those effectively. But you also need to make sure that with everyone on your team, you understand what their strengths are so that you can not just leverage them effectively, but play to their strengths. Give them assignments and projects that will play to their strengths. Ensure that when they're on a team, they're leveraging the right strengths and not trying to do something that they're not good at doing. The way that you understand and know that someone has a specific strength is when they are obviously successful, when they seem to feel and they are effective, when they're leveraging that specific strength, if you will. That's the S on this sign model from the Gallup organization. The second one is if they seem to be drawn to a certain type of task or project, and they seem to look forward to it and get excited about it. That's the I. When they seem to feel very engaged in a specific project or task, they're inquisitive and focused, they're kind of in the flow. That's another sign that that's one of their strengths. And then finally, at the end of it, when they seem to be very fulfilled and they are like genuine and like coming across as authentic, that's another sign that that is one of their strengths. So leverage and use this sign model in order to understand what your employees' strengths are and write those down so that you have a sense of, okay, this is kind of the profile, if you will, of each of your employees so that you can understand how to manage them more effectively, speak to them and communicate with them more effectively based on their strengths, but assign them the right role within a project or a task as well based on those strengths. And coaching skill number 5 to develop to be a more effective leader is to develop your unique leadership style. When we leverage and have our clients when we're doing team coaching for an organization, and we have, for example, them do the Strengths Finder assessment for each individual person, everyone always asks us, what are the most important, the top 5 strengths for a leader? And our answer is always, there isn't a specific profile of a leader. The best leader has to have these 5 strengths in this order. It's all about your unique leadership style and more about you understanding what those strengths are and leveraging them effectively. So you need to, in order to understand and develop what your unique style is, you need to understand what your strengths are and how you can leverage those within your team. You need to, number two, understand what your soft skills are. Are you great at change management? Or are you great at handling conflict? Or empowering others and really understanding what their strengths are, or something else? Because that will play into what your strengths as a leader are and what you should be leaning on, but also where you might need some advice and help and assistance from other people or your team in order to kind of fill in that gap. To understand what your leadership style is, you need to understand what your career values are. What is meaningful to you about being a leader, and a leader at your specific organization, within your specific role. And then finally, you want to consider and think about what your personality type is so that you can let other people know this as well. If you're more introverted, for example, let them know that in advance. I may not be the one that's talking all the time in the meetings. That's because I'm more introverted, and I want to encourage you all to participate. Are you more creative and kind of off the cuff? Or are you more structured? Are you more detailed or big picture? The more you understand who you are as a professional will help you then understand who you are as a leader as well. And then our final slide in terms of our tips, and then we'll go to action steps and Q&A here in just a moment, Adam, is these are the top 10 leadership skills that are the most important. Again, this is a tool from Development Dimensions International as well. And these are what they assert based, again, on their survey and their data, are the top most important leadership skills today that leaders have. And I would encourage you all to download this, print it out, and rate yourself on where you are on each of these areas, keeping in mind that some of them may not be as relevant for your role as others are, and that's okay. Rank yourself on the ones that are the most important. But these are the leadership skills and strengths that you need to work towards developing. The coaching skills that we talked about today will help you build and develop these strengths further. So those are our top 10 coaching skills that we believe every leader should master and work towards. We want you all to get out your pen and paper now, please, and start to write down 2 action steps that you will take in the next week in order to take what you've learned here today and make it real. It could be filling out the leadership wheel, like we said. It could be completing the active empathic listening scale that we shared earlier. Happy to do that complimentary strategy session with you if that feels what's best for you. That's great. So go ahead and write those down for us for just a moment. And then let's start to move to the Q&A portion. By the way, as we get to this, if anyone would like to talk to us about our coaching services, I'd be happy to do so. Just feel free to email us at admin@halliecrawford.com. And as you are starting to think about your questions, everyone, I want to close out my talking points, if you will, with the quote that I always use to push me out of my comfort zone when I need to try something new that may feel a little bit less comfortable. And that is, the greatest risk in life is not taking one. I always use this when I know I need to try something and do something that, feels a little bit scary to me. Like I know some of these things that we've talked about today might feel like for you. But remember, everyone, without risk, there's no reward. All right, Adam, if we could go to the Q&A, that would be great. And if you wouldn't mind reading them for me, that would be fantastic too, because I always get confused about where they are.
Absolutely, yeah, happy to moderate Q&A. For attendees, I saw a couple of hands going up. Remember to submit your questions to the questions box on the control panel. So write those questions in, and we'll get to as many as we can in our remaining time. We have about 7 or 8 minutes.
Awesome.
So yeah, absolutely happy to get started. So one question that we had, Hallie, in your work with clients, which of the skills do you see as most often lacking in leaders? And maybe that's from that leadership wheel. You mentioned that there is no profile of an ideal leader, but in working with clients, which of these skills have you seen to be one of the harder skills to develop, and what are your suggestions there?
That's a great question. I love that one. Really good. I would say the curiosity and the powerful questions one. That too often they're either not asking enough questions to just kind of gauge and check in with what's going on, and they're asking, and I don't want to say the wrong questions because, it's not about right or wrong. It depends on the scenario and situation, but not asking enough of those powerful questions that empower people and encourage them. Too often, a lot of our clients as leaders, there's something that they like about, which I get, about being like a firefighter and like fixing the problem instead of like bringing up the people around them to do that so they can step out of that role a little bit more. That's what I would say.
Great, thanks. Another question, and this would be, I think, more for people who are being managed as opposed to managers themselves. But say you are working with a manager who is not as focused on establishing this coaching relationship. How might you go about kind of reorienting that relationship, having a conversation in which you kind of advocate for more coaching?
Yeah, and what you want. So I would have kind of at the very beginning when we talked about the safe space, so to speak, and designing your relationship a little bit more, I would ask them if you could have a conversation with them about how you work together. And can we talk about ways that we can work together even more effectively? And as part of that conversation, ask for some of the things that you feel like you would like in order to be more effective and successful. It could be that it doesn't occur to them, or maybe they're just not good at this, and it would take you to kind of step up to the plate. So I would start with that first one of, can we talk for a few minutes about not just like what we're doing, but how we're doing it, and bring it up, the things that you would like to have, ask them if those things would be possible.
Great, thanks. We had one attendee ask if you could actually go back to the wheel that has the top skills for leaders on it, just so they could see that again. And I know you mentioned downloading this
PowerPoint.
and completing it. Will that be easiest to do by asking for the slide deck, or is there a website or somewhere else where they can go to download this wheel?
Do the slide deck just because I'd have to dig it up. So do the slide deck, but if anyone feels really strongly about, hey, I want to know then I can dig that up and find it for you. But we'll
Awesome,
start
thanks.
with the slides first. Yeah.
Another question around establishing and building this coaching relationship for leaders. To what extent do you recommend in working with clients having like a lot of structure to how this is done, like thinking specifically about whether it's necessary to provide some of this feedback or coaching through like written, not even necessarily emails, but like a document of some kind in which you provide and solicit some of the feedback and coaching? Or do you, yeah, and I know some of that is specific to what will work best for a particular leader in their
Person.
relationship, but do you find that having some materials like that or some structure can be helpful?
Absolutely. So I would do verbal, like conversation about it first, and then follow up with written. And I definitely think the structure would be good. Like, so start out with, okay, how are we working together? What changes do we need to make? And then you could even honestly go through this list of the 10 things that we've talked about today and say, okay, let me evaluate these and, talk with the other person about it. That could provide the structure. So I would have it in some way, shape, or form, but I wouldn't go into it like I would talk things through first and identify what the top, the low-hanging fruit is, the most important areas, and then follow that up with written and use it from there, the written part.
Perfect. I know we also have available for our attendees a handout, and is that'll be a good opportunity, I guess, for folks to organize their thoughts around this topic and
Yes.
communicate questions. I just want to
Yep.
make sure that I pointed that out for folks joining us, that you can download the handout from the handouts tab on the control panel. So good opportunity to do that now before we close out. And yeah, with that, I invite everyone to contact admin@halliecrawford.com for any of the resources that you mentioned here, the deck, so that you can fill out the leadership wheel. You can request that listening scale worksheet or sign up for a free strategy session with that email. So yeah, with that, I think we're ready to yeah, thank you first of all, Hallie, for joining us and for presenting on this topic. Thank you
Most welcome.
for all of our attendees for joining us. I hope that everyone knows we're less than 2 weeks away from Career Month, which kicks off on November 4th. We'll have a webinar on that date titled Resume 2.0, Strategies and Tools Supported by Data. So I hope that you can join us and learn insights to help take your resumes to the next level. As always, you can visit our events page at careers.uchicagoalumni.org for a full list of our upcoming programs. Thank you again, Hallie, and thank you everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.